Hello Bloomington, I'm Mayor Tim Busse, and this is the Council Minute for the week of July 26th. As you drive around Bloomington this time of year, you see a lot of city crews working on our streets. Our annual pavement management program includes seal coating, overlays, and reconstruction. We also include improvements to our trail system in the pavement management program. Each year, Bloomington spends about $18 million maintaining our roads and our trails. Back in 2015, the City Council approved franchise fees on utility bills paid to CenterPoint Energy and Xcel Energy. These franchise fees are dedicated specifically to the pavement management program to make sure we have a predictable and consistent source of funding to keep our streets and trails safe and in good condition. These fees of $3.75 each month are paid by every property in Bloomington that uses gas and electric. If you look at your bill from CenterPoint, it lists the cost as city franchise fee. And your bill from Xcel, it says city fees. Now, when we first adopted those franchise fees, we knew that periodic increases would be needed to keep up with the cost of inflation. The first scheduled increase was supposed to occur at the beginning of 2021, but we made a decision last year to not increase fees because of the economic impacts of the pandemic. But the needs of our streets and the trails remain, so the council decided a fee increase couldn't be put off any longer. The increase to the franchise fees approved this week is an increase of 85 cents per month to each of the utility bills. We have consistently heard from residents how much you value the trail system here in Bloomington. As we plan for future improvements, we're looking at how trails and sidewalks are prioritized, and we want to be sure that our investments are equitable across the community. Knowing that we have resources in the future to do this work allows us to meet the needs of our community today and tomorrow. Earlier this year, Congress passed the American Rescue Plan Act, directing much-needed federal dollars to states and local governments. Bloomington will receive a total of $11.4 million, and this week, the city manager presented recommendations for how the city might use those funds. Before making recommendations, city staff had to understand the rules set by the U.S. Treasury Department on how the funds could be spent. Congress and the President want to be sure that the federal dollars are getting into the local economies. They don't allow cities to just put the money in reserve funds or sock the money away in a rainy day account. The recommendations from staff are an appropriate balance of funding infrastructure and technology for core city services, making investments in public health and public safety, and getting funds out into the community to help grow businesses, increase home ownership, assist the hospitality industry, and address homelessness. The bulk of the funds, about $6 million, will go toward capital improvement projects to replace critical water utility infrastructure and to make necessary improvements to city facilities, such as a roof replacement at Public Works. Another $800,000 will go toward technology, and the biggest chunk of that money will be used to finally finish our fiber communications network that connects city facilities. About $1.7 million will go toward public safety and public health. One of the major investments there will allow the Bloomington Fire Department to add 3 battalion chiefs and pay for those positions over the next 3 years. This will help address a critical staffing need to make sure that our fire department can continue to meet our goals for effective response time. Another $500,000 will go to Bloomington Public Health to improve their outreach and client services, to build our data management system, and add a community health worker. We will also be directing more than $1.2 million out into the community. That money will establish a neighborhood redevelopment center model to help grow small and minority-owned businesses. It will go towards the city's down payment assistance program, which helps more families move into home ownership. And funds will be used for prevention and services for people experiencing homelessness. I should also note that we had already committed $250,000 to the Bloomington Convention and Visitors Bureau last month to fund marketing efforts that will help jumpstart our hospitality industry, which, if you recall, was bringing in more than $10 million a year in city revenues prior to the pandemic. Now, we expect it's going to take 4 or 5 years before revenues return to that level, so helping the Convention and Visitors Bureau get the hospitality sector moving again is really important to our financial health. One thing I want to be clear about when we're talking about the federal funds, these are one-time dollars, and a majority of the expenses are identified as one-time expenses. These funds definitely help address some of the financial and budget challenges the city had as a result of the pandemic, but they don't replace the revenues we've lost or fill the gap for lower revenues in the next few years that support our daily operations. We are absolutely grateful for these funds, and we will certainly put them to good use on behalf of Bloomington. And we will continue to work on some challenging budget issues as we move ahead. I'll share more about the budget later in August when the City Council begins working on the 2022 city budgets and tax levy. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago, way back in 2018 to be specific, the City Council hosted a number of town hall forums to answer questions from residents and to talk about city issues. One of the topics we focused on was the need to reinvest in community amenities and city facilities. As many of you know, a good number of our facilities like the Bloomington Ice Garden, Creekside Community Center, and the Dwan Golf Course Clubhouse are aging and they are in need of investment. Other city facilities, such as our public health building, the Public Works Mechanics Garage, and 4 of our 5 fire stations are flat out outdated and are in need of replacement. In total, the city's capital improvement plan over the next 5 years includes projects equaling more than $360 million. Not all of these projects are funded by property taxes, but for the ones that are, like the projects I mentioned a few moments ago, we've been trying to put together a reasonable plan to do those projects and to do them in a way that doesn't overwhelm our property taxpayers. This week, the council and staff discussed a way to pay for a number of these projects with a revenue source that comes mostly from non-residents of Bloomington. That is a local option sales tax. A lot of Minnesota cities and counties have local sales taxes. A majority of them are in greater Minnesota, but in recent years, the legislature has given more cities around Minnesota the permission to collect a local option sales tax. Just last month, the legislature approved a local sales tax for Edina, Maple Grove, and Oakdale. The tax collected, usually a half cent on every dollar, is collected on all taxable purchases made in a city and then is spent locally on a specific project or projects. State law says those projects have to have some kind of regional use or benefit, and it also requires that the local sales tax is in effect only for the time it takes to pay for those projects, so it doesn't become a permanent tax. And importantly, local voters have to approve the local sales tax before it can go into effect. Now, before deciding if we wanted to consider a local sales tax in Bloomington, we needed to get some information. We asked the University of Minnesota Extension Service to figure out how much sales tax is generated in Bloomington and how much Bloomington might receive if we had a half-cent local sales tax in place. The Extension Service told us that a local option sales tax would generate about $10.6 million a year. But even more interesting is that the study showed that the vast majority of those tax revenues, about 75%, would come from non-residents of Bloomington. In other words, people coming to Bloomington and spending money in Bloomington would be paying the bulk of that $10.6 million each year. Using that as a baseline, the city's financial advisor calculated that amount of annual revenue could pay for projects totaling up to $150 million. Now, put differently, a local option sales tax would be mostly paid for by non-residents and could help fund improvements to city facilities that are used not just by Bloomington residents, but by people from around the region. And it could relieve you, the Bloomington taxpayer, of up to $150 million of projects funded by property taxes. Now, that's a pretty promising alternative revenue source that could help ensure modernization of many of the facilities that contribute to our quality of life and spreads the cost of these regional assets to users around the region. We have a long way to go before deciding whether we should move ahead. Staff will be working over the next couple of months to flesh out possible projects for consideration so we have a better idea of actual costs. We will also need to start discussing this with our legislative delegation to see if they're willing to support a request from the city. And we need to continue to provide information to you. If we do request approval from the state, Bloomington voters will have to also approve it. And if we get to that point, we want you to make an informed decision. So stay tuned for more information through the rest of this year as we discuss our legislative request going into 2022. That was a lot of information, and I think that's the most numbers I've ever used in a council minute. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact me or city staff. I'll see you next week. Until then, stay safe, Bloomington.